So Lara, I want to continue off straight from last week, right? And we're talking about the last part where, how do we deal with media? Because would you agree that today when you read the news, whether from social media, there seems to be like an atmosphere, if I can put it, like there's like a mind control, like a narrative out there. And we saw that very clearly during the COVID time, right?
Yep. I think it's really like what Elon Musk wrote in his Twitter. I mean, at that time, it was still Twitter. He mentioned that wokeness is like a mind virus. So I think it's really that sort of atmosphere that we could really see, because what the media is portraying is really how do they propagate their agenda.
Yeah, and of course, when we want to discuss this, and we talked a little bit about this the previous episode, with the proposed ban of TikTok. And, so many people are reading news from social media and from link. And sometimes we talk about news and people start to ask the question, how can I be sure that the news is not biased? But by the way, I think every reporting is biased.
Yep.
And we just have to find out. And, when you look at certain publication, they focus on certain things. Like in Malaysia Kini, they focus more on the government, the law, the administration. So you don't see a lot of day-to-day. You won't see like news on accidents, road jam or things like that. That's not their purpose. And for the Western news, like for example, you look at Politico or you look at Breitbart, they don't report the day-to-day event because they focus on certain niche and genre. So I think that's one of the first things that people need to understand, that when you read something, if you read Rolling Stone, it's more like pop culture. But
Yep.
Rolling Stone is becoming more and more political also.
Yes.
And then I don't know, when I was young, we used to subscribe the Star. And I didn't realize, primary school, that Star was actually a very political newspaper. It was owned by MCA for a long time. You always buy the Star because you want the entertainment section, the sports section. But of course, later on, you find out that the chief editor is actually very, very closely linked with political party. So those are the kind of things. So, I mean, maybe before we look at one example today, what about, Lyra, you share a little bit your approach, how would you approach? Because remember, before we did this episode, we're just having some discussion. And I said, I'm going to try to go and read some mainstream media. I just find it so difficult because I think it was during the COVID time we became even more determined, right? That we're not going to read things which are basically full of opinion and not factually based. So I don't mind admitting that I have not been reading mainstream media. So I try to do a little bit. And in recent time, with Israel, Hamas, with all the things that's happening in Malaysia also, the green wave, the boycotts and things like that, just very, very hard to read mainstream media because they are like just reporting something which they prepare for mass consumption. But maybe you can share a little bit about your approach, or maybe even your personal journey, how you kind of narrow down and, maybe, how you even apply discernment.
Yeah, I think I came from that perspective whereby, I mean, obviously social media is the fastest way to get any news at all. So, I mean, first thing you wake up, you kind of like scroll through Instagram casually. And that's when you begin to see, hey, there are certain things that are trending. I think so for me personally, I used to start off from social media. Then after that, I will kind of like went into Twitter just to have a look. I mean, now known as X, just to have a look if certain topics are also very similarly trending. So that's when, if there are certain things that caught my mind, then I will begin to do a bit more research. As in, I will go into various news platforms. So obviously, sometimes you're going to have to get it from the mainstream media and you just see what they are presenting first. Then after that, you go to what we call as a bit more alternative sort of media and you begin to make a comparison. But personally, I mean, when it comes to Malaysian news, I think there's only just so much news outlet that you could go to, like The Star,
Yep.
Malaysia Kini. I mean, personally, I would read more Malaysia Kini than anything else. Malaysia Kini first, then after that, I will read The Star or even FMT, just to have like a bit of perspective.
Yep.
But over time, you sort of know that they are somewhat like echoing chamber, especially when they're reporting news that are coming from overseas.
Yep.
So in that sense, I wouldn't really want to read this because you always see that, hey, they are referencing another news outlet. So if that's the case, why not I just go straight to the news outlet? So so from there, I began to pick up an interest to just go straight to the respective sources that you knew that they were drawing reference from. So I won't really read what Malaysia Kini is reporting about, let's say, certain overseas news.
Yep.
So that became like clear cut, as in local news, I will just go to the local news media outlet, and then the overseas one, I will just go straight to the respective ones that I knew of. And I mean, you kind of have to do a bit more research, as in you have to know, okay, this media is more popular in United States, for instance, or UK, for instance, and certain things like even when it came to the Middle East war, I would read like Al Jazeera, for instance, or even Times of Israel, just to have a bit of perspective.
Yeah, those are like on polar opposite of each other,
so
right?
So then you begin to see, hey, how come it's
so different?
Yeah, the exact opposite. I mean, that you cannot get any further different. So from there, you begin to like really just zoom down and see what are the other news media outlets are also presenting concerning the same topic. I think that's where you begin to develop discernment, because if you're not making a comparison, like an apple to apple sort of comparison, you can't tell the difference. I mean, if you're only just solely relying on one source and you think it's the truth, then even though they are reporting half truth, you will just believe that as the whole thing, because that's what you read, and you can even confidently tell other people that, hey, that's what I read. So the news media outlet present this and I 100% believe it. But the thing is, when it comes to, I think what really, really happened during COVID era was that when there is so much suppression of media concerning the efficacy of vaccine, concerning even just whether or not you should be taking vaccine, what are the various options of vaccine, if there is. So then you begin to see which one is more superior, or should you even take vaccine at all. So you kind of have to do a bit more due diligence, and not just because, oh, hey, this batch is rolling out this type A vaccine, type B vaccine, and you begin to just, okay, let's just go there for convenience. I mean, you obviously can do that. I mean, that's your choice. But the thing is, if you don't study and really just make a comparison, how are you going to even come to a conclusion at all?
Right.
So obviously you're going to have to listen to something. Like sometimes it's the government that says A must be correct, then you just blindly believe it. And then, I mean, who else to blame if there is any consequences at all for doing certain action? So that's when I began to really be a bit more selective and intentional, to just really zoom down on certain things. I mean, obviously, when it comes to vaccine, those sort of things, you're going to have to like read a bit more medical journal and things like that, and begin to just do a bit of comparison. I mean, it's not that I particularly like that sort of topic, but when it comes to the company trying to quote unquote mandate you to
and not only
vaccine.
the company, the government is trying to do
exactly. But the thing is, because construction industry is so reliant on, I mean, that's where I'm based at. It's so reliant on the MITI approval, and MITI approval is linked to how many staff are being vaccinated. So when you have that sort of things, you kind of have to really, really do your due diligence, because otherwise you're going to have to just be conform. I think the thing that I think because I'm quite a non-conformist.
But you mean by nature?
Yeah, by nature. I think, I mean, when it came growing up, I remember one very silly incident, but I think somewhat a lot of people will probably just follow through. Like, let's say Chinese New Year, you have certain Chinese tradition, pantan. You will, when parents are saying that, hey, you can't clean the house on day one, because maybe the luck is gonna like just be swept away. And I was thinking, hey, wait a minute. I mean, I remember, I think I was just primary one at the time. I was thinking, hey, wait a minute. Those people in the old days, they don't even have vacuum cleaner. If I just vacuum the floor, I'm technically not sweeping away the luck. I mean, you begin to like experiment with these sort of things. And when you did it, like, hey, nothing happened. The family did well throughout the whole year. Next year, okay, you begin to like challenge different sort of things. I think because of that sort of upbringing, and sometimes the parents will be like, when you're asking them, why can't you do this? Then they say, just do. But
Yeah.
just do, I think it's not a satisfactory sort of answer. I think that I couldn't not take, I mean, if you give me a reasonable answer, I would just take it as it is. But if it's something like, no, just listen, that's all. And I think because of that, I sort of developed a bit of more non-conformist sort of mentality, and really just gonna try it out. Obviously, you're gonna bump into some road bumps and things like that. But sometimes but that's where you begin to learn and develop that sort of discernment. I think because of that, I just sort of, when it comes to media, naturally I would want to test out different source.
Yeah, very interesting you mentioned all this, because I think COVID time, and we did quite a few episodes on the alternative media, the citizen reporting. And indeed, it takes kind of conscious and active effort to kind of not conform. Because like you were saying, most people are so tuned into social media. Because the power of social media is really the power of suggestion. When you wake up, trending, and you know, some people, they live to follow the trend. And so, oh, this is trending, this is very exciting and things like that. So in fact, they don't realize they're being told what to think. And I think that is one of the reasons why, you know, we're saying in this season, the American election cycle, probably one of the most important in their history, many within and even outside. You know, those outside, some of you are listening, you're wondering, you know, why we keep on talking about America, because what happened there, for the better or for the worse, will have great impact. I mean, look at Malaysia, you know, our fate is so tied to the performance of ringgit versus USD, right? And it's like entire sector can be booming or being wiped out. But I was just hearing what you're saying, and indeed, people have to kind of consciously do something, right? And we're not saying that you have to be a news junkie, right? I mean, I think both of us are somewhat in a junkie.
Yeah, but even then, I would say I'm quite selective as well. I mean, I don't necessarily go into all the news. Like, for instance, I mean, I only read some sports event, that's all, because I pay attention to maybe like tennis, and like with David, my husband, that likes Liverpool.
Yeah.
I mean, I would naturally watch a bit of those sort of news, but aside from that, I wouldn't be like wanting to watch read any sort of news that comes into the mind. But obviously, that when there are certain things that are trending, naturally you just want to keep a bit updated rather than being outdated. So, I mean, having said that, people just gonna have to choose, because obviously all this thing takes time, and you're gonna have to make an allocation. But if you can scroll the media all day long, surely you can allocate 5-10 minutes just to read a bit of news and really just find out a bit. You don't have to be eloquent in any and every subject, just like how people are being trained in certain industry only, that's all. And you can be like specialists in that particular industry, that's all. And you don't necessarily have to know anything and everything. So just start from, for me, I think I just started off from where I felt like it interests me, and begin to do a bit more research.
Yep.
And you begin to find out, hey, actually there's a whole lot of interesting things out there.
And very interesting, we were talking about the Malaysian perspective, right? Because most people, if you go to the Star, Malay Mail, FMT, or Malaysia Kini to read about American news, then most likely you're going to see AP, you're going to see CNBC, you're going to see Wall Street Journal, maybe you're going to see Guardian or BBC. You know, these are what we call mainstream media, right? So, but when you look at mainstream media and you look at the alternative media, when we say alternative media, we're talking about they are not the establishment media. They are more, maybe a lot of them kind of function in social media because they don't really have an outlet. Like now, since Elon Musk took over ads, I think a lot of the conservative voices started to come back because they were censored to a great degree for a long time.
Yeah, I remember very, very early on, we did discuss about, as in the pros and cons of having a certain social media platform that are too conservative leaning or too liberal leaning. I mean, you
Correct.
can't really have like the extreme, because if you only go to a certain platform where they only advocate conservative values,
Yep.
that's all you're gonna know. I mean, as in, you won't know what the other side is gonna argue about. So, but if you have an interest in media, I think because I mean, both of us obviously have an interest in media. What you're gonna do is really you're gonna just read both sides of the story so that you begin to formulate your own argument. And when it comes the right time, we're not saying that you go out and debate anyone and everyone, but if there is an opportunity to try to get people to just begin to think about it. I mean, even I remember there's one time I was just discussing with one of my former colleagues about Andrew Tate. I mean, even news like that, I think I was just asking me, what do you think about him? Because a lot of people think that he's a womanizer and maybe what he did was wrong. But you begin to like really read into what he is advocating for, and you begin to see, hey, but he's actually trying to advocate for like men to really rise up to their own identity. Then you begin to think, why would people call him someone who undermines women at all? So I mean, that sort of things you begin to like really just study, because I mean, obviously my former colleague here was very into Chinese media, so I was just kind of keen to just listen to what he thinks about it, and he begins to also think about what other people are saying. I think the whole idea is you're able to come to a state where you can agree to disagree. I think that's all I was after, as in you. I mean, we don't necessarily have to agree with everything. I mean, obviously, some people enjoy listening to those talk show by career politician or ex-career politician. But I mean, it's entertaining. But the thing is, at the end of the day, you have to understand they grew up, they were being brought out to be a politician all their life.
They have a particular agenda, you know.
Obviously, I mean, they still need to maintain the popularity, the relevance to the society, and so that when it comes to the right time, I mean, we were talking in the previous episode where like Newsom, why he won't participate in the current election, because obviously he has to be calculative in terms of how he's going to bring himself to the public. I mean, we also have people like that in Malaysian society, and where we're going to just have to be careful. But if all that we consume is just those talk show by the career politician, and yeah, I mean, it's no different from you just reading certain media that is obviously, you know, it's more certain party leaning. I mean, we're talking about certain media like maybe the Medical Times, that you know it's obviously very past leaning media, and all they advocate for is really the Islamic agenda and things like that. If that's all you read, that's all you're gonna get. That's all. I mean, we're just saying that you need to consider different alternative, and because we live in a multiracial country, multicultural country, and you can't just have one side saying that I'm always the right one. I mean, I'm always the victim. So if we're always having that sort of mentality, I think the society can never mature.
Yeah, I mean, just from what you were saying, I think the point you're making, first, of course, you know, go and expose yourself to many things so that you are able to form your own conclusion. And then the other thing you mentioned, which is very interesting, you talk about your friend more leaning towards Chinese media. And I think that's the other thing that is maybe not so easy to do, but if people want to have a deeper understanding and appreciation, is to recognize your own bias. So, I mean, we all have different biases, right? So those, I mean, you look at the Chinese media, there is a way of reporting, and we see that maybe more prevalent with the older generation. You see, in terms of, now remember we're talking in context of American news, right? So obviously we are more, I think most of us are a bit more Western minded. So, you know, we talk about Trump and things like that. But when people think about Trump, the whole lens is very colored by China, by what's happening here. And even when our Prime Minister went to Australia, remember, and people asking about, you know, are you too much, you know, what's the word they use already? Like he was talking about other nation being xenophobia, right? Something like that. And so he kind of defended his statement, but in a typical Anwar's way, very
non-committal.
Non-committal, you know, he doesn't want to ruffle the feathers of the Australian friends. But obviously you can see that, you know, many nations in ASEAN especially, they are kind of in between giants, right? You know, China and America, they don't want to offend either one. But at some point they had to make a stand.
But would you think that probably it's that I mean, people, obviously, a lot of people are being perceived to be just an average citizen. So, I mean, if you have to report to, let's say, two domineering bosses, I think people tend to shy away from trying to make a stand.
Don't take a position.
Yeah, so maybe it's because of that sort of upbringing and even the circumstances that cause them to think that I don't have to make any position at all. I mean, so I don't think the Prime Minister was doing wrong because he's not making any stand.
Oh, yeah, I mean, from a political point of view, definitely that is a right game to play. But what I'm saying is, like, people who are more exposed to the Chinese media or exposed to the Western media, and even in Western media, you have the establishment and the alternative. You know, in fact, even alternative is not a good word. I mean, how would you describe? I mean, we if we talk predominantly about the American media, because I mean, we use the term populist media, right? As in, now of course the establishment will call, like, you know, news site like Breitbart, they call them outright, like extreme right. But that's like one of the sites we most frequently go, because now maybe we can talk a little bit about why we like Breitbart. And it's not because we are right winger, yeah. you know, when we did the political spectrum kind of, because if you say right winger, then you are more authoritarian, you are more I don't know, you have very conservative value.
Or maybe even more controlling.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I think I'm more libertarian, you know.
Yeah, I think
morally.
I was quite middle.
Yeah, so, you know, this kind of, you know, it doesn't fit what we believe. But then my personal attraction to Breitbart is really the quality of their reporting, because a lot of time, for example, one of the articles we wanted to mention is recently, right? Remember?
Yes.
Recently, there's a big news because President Trump was, making a comment on motor industry. Now, of course, US is one of the biggest motor market, motor producer and motor market. Of course, China is out and coming, rivaling in terms of manufacturing and also the market. So he was saying things, and now I'm not going to read the whole thing. I mean, if we can, we'll just put in the clip. But he was just saying something, because there was a plan by China to make a factory in Mexico. Now, of course, Mexico, US, so close, right? So you make EV there, you make it very cheap, you flood the EV to, I mean, assuming, now, of course, whether EV will take off very successfully in near future in America is still remain to be seen. But assuming you can bring down the price 40 to 50%, it's going to wipe out the market. So I think in that context, then he used the word, then he said, look, this is what is happening with Biden's administration. If I don't get elected, so, you know, this is a campaign stuff, this is campaign narrative, or you can say campaign promise. And he said, if I'm not elected, it's going to be a bloodbath for the whole. And he's talking about motor car industry, and then immediately you look at the mainstream media, and so you have NBC News, immediately it's a real time, and they say Trump says it's going to be a bloodbath if he loses the election. CBS News, same. In Ohio rally, Trump says there will be a bloodbath if he loses. Rolling Stone, same thing. So they are trying to kind of link that statement to the 6th of January insurrection, which, by the way, is still happening, and they have not been able to kind of tie. In fact, there was no violence. And now, increasingly, we're seeing that the whole thing was a setup. Now, of course, we don't know, you know, because when the authority wants to hide something, we're talking about FBI, CIA level conspiracy. It might be exposed or it might not be exposed. But they are trying to say that he had conducted something violent. But even though, remember, President Trump last Twitter post, and he asked everyone to be peaceful, not to... And that's still his last posting. Now he's on social truth, but he's not coming back to Twitter. But X now. But his last post is a definite evidence that he didn't advocate for the violence, and he was impeached twice, and you know, Congress couldn't convict him. So this is the whole thing that is happening, and so it became known as the last the last 1 week, I guess, they call it what, the bloodbath hoax, right? So this is the kind of thing that is happening. So that's why I go back to my initial point, why I personally like Breitbart is when they talk about this kind of thing, they will show what other people are doing, and then they will show the exact clip of Trump making a speech. And you make up your own mind. And I think you have to be a total idiot to think that Trump was talking about physical violence.
Exactly. I mean, a lot of people are saying, I think, just take the Middle East war, for instance. I mean, Israel Hamas. Because when people are like just so emotionally engulfed in the whole thing, you're going to have to like just take a step back. Because if you're going to be so vexed by this whole media, I mean, the best advice would be just take a little break from reading this whole thing, and then you come back again when you have a rational mind. Because if you read all this thing with emotional like mentality, let me tell you, I mean, you're gonna just read it with a colored lens. I mean, that will be the last thing that you want to do, because you're developing a worldview based on your emotions, which may be very, very biased.
Now, talk about the Hamas Israel one. I think one of the example we talk about, we didn't talk about in this show, but remember the time when there was an explosion at the hospital, and look at New York Times, and New York Times have changed the headline 2 times. So the first headline was hospital destroyed by Israeli missile, and then second one is hospital destroyed by Israeli bomb, because they realize it's not a missile.
Yeah, a misfire or something.
Yeah, something like that. And then the third one will be just hospital destroyed by some kind of explosion. And later they found out that it's not even, it's something outside. And of course, later on, people found out that, they begin to kind of push New York Times, where's your source, who give you the information. And the most unbelievable thing, and this is all in the news. And that's why when people do due diligence, and that's one of the things we are encouraging people. You just do a little bit. We're not asking you to be governmental news, media junkie. I mean, if that's your interest, good and fine. But you need to at least push in a little bit so that you are not mind controlled. So eventually, what was the outcome? They say, well, we get the information because we have Zoom meeting with Hamas. It's like...
I mean, doesn't that tell you that they are the spokesperson for Hamas?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if that's you, and we always say, look, you want to talk crap, you want to talk bullshit, it's okay. If you declare out, you tell everyone, look, I'm an idiot, and you say idiot things, then it's okay.
But I find what is most interesting thing is when you present to the people who are very much pro Hamas, pro Palestine, and so you're just saying, hey, but have you considered that all these Hamas top leaders, they are not in the country at all. I mean, they are not there physically to fight all this battle, and they are actually billionaires.
Yeah, like, Qatar living a life of luxury and things like that. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, just by one phone call, that's it. I mean, have you considered the fact that they siphon a lot of the humanitarian aid that was being sent there through UN? And when you have biased perception, you can't hear anything else. It's like the mind is literally being blocked, which is why at the very beginning of this episode, we say that it's like a mind virus that controls you, because you're not open at all to listen to any other different perspective. And it's just kind of sad because, I mean, in Malaysia, you have a lot of this top level corruption. And if anything else you could identify with, hey, could it be that actually their own leaders that they voted in are the ones that siphon out all this money that cause such an extreme poverty in the land? And have you even considered this perspective? And because people were just so emotionally triggered when electricity is being cut, water supply is being cut, those sort of things, and even internet connection is being cut, and people are like just blaming the Israeli government. But then you begin to think, hey, the infrastructure is not in place. Whose fault was it? I mean, is it the government, or is it actually the neighboring government's fault? So, I mean, those sort of things people don't consider, and yet there is just bias after bias. I mean, even with what is happening now with the socks issue and things like that, I think you kind of have to wonder, hey, what sort of fault, what sort of illegal things that have been committed here. I think that's the part that I was like trying to like read through, but it's kind of difficult also because that's the local news that you kind of just have to like flip through all the.
Yeah, I think the Swords incident is an interesting case study also because see, at the end of the day, I think it's unfortunately true that emotion will always triumph over facts. And especially, I mean, I think it's a common knowledge and people will, I don't think anyone will dispute the fact that in Malaysia, religions and race have been weaponized. I think that's the only word. And on both sides, of course, we can talk about particular religion, particular race, but it's on both sides. And that's really, I think, from beginning until now, the point we've been saying is if we want to get out from this cycle, then we must develop the ability to have an independent mind. And at least you have to be like interested to know the truth, to consider the truth. We're not saying you have to be like Sherlock Holmes, you can you can have deduction over everything. Not quite like that. I mean, of course, some people are like that, very, very sharp. But everyone, you carry a vote, you carry some influence within your community, within your nation. So I think it is really everyone's responsibility to rise above this mind control. So you can see another example, which I think is a good example. I mean, we go back to COVID again, like vaccine. Remember, we kept saying in several of our episodes, the one most mind controlled by the need for vaccine was the Chinese. And it's not an emotional thing. It's factually proven by the intake and acceptance of vaccine. I mean, they have all the data. You go to Code Blue and things like that. Data is there. Look at the intake. Look at the intake among children and things like that. Chinese leads the way. And we always say, I think it's due to the fear and things like that. But now, you start to see more kind of, now of course, the medical authority, medical establishment still deny that it has anything to do with vaccine, right? I mean, just a few days ago, FDA finally settled with ivermectin because they have been kind of saying, the bad things about ivermectin should not be used and dangerous, it will kill you and things like that. So they settled, basically FDA have to retract all the warning. And basically they're saying that everything we said about ivermectin was wrong.
Yep.
So you can do that with one retraction. It's like, after I take how many vaccine and things like that, now you tell me the vaccine maybe was not good. So that was the whole thing. And do you feel there's a shift, at least among the Chinese community that we know? If today people say, go and take a new vaccine, how many people will do it?
Yeah, I definitely do think that a lot of people, because I've been asking a lot of my colleagues who are very, very fearful, and especially when you, any sort of news or numbers that demonstrated the rise of COVID cases.
That was that time, right?
Yeah, I mean, even like recently, I mean, of the last
people,
few months, and they are like, hey, let's just be careful. Let's just be a bit more cautious, and maybe we should consider wearing masks again.
Would they take another vaccine?
That's the thing. So, I mean, even among this group of people, they are not keen. They're not keen at all because they have seen many unfortunate death cases that surround them, and they knew it's definitely nothing else except the vaccine related.
So if people are motivated by fear, then I guess it's which one you fear more.
Yeah.
Whether you fear getting COVID more or you fear getting the adverse effect of vaccine. And by the way, that is the proper evaluation of vaccine. It's like you have to think about pros and cons. You have to think about the risk-benefit ratio. Because, I mean, even medication, you talk about diabetes, you talk about cholesterol, you talk about high blood. A lot of these medication is true for a lot of people, no side effect, but for other people there is some and maybe potentially adverse side effect.
Yeah, I mean, even so, those people who have high blood pressure and the risk is stroke, and the doctor might say that you have very, very low chance of getting stroke. That doesn't mean that
you won't get
0%. And there is opportunity if the doctor is a bit more conservative, and obviously they knew the side effects of this medication, And maybe they might just advise you not to take it. But there is that risk that you still have to be aware of. And you still have to make a decision whether or not do you want to take medication or do you not want to take medication. I mean, both of which there's no right and wrong. I mean, you make the evaluation after hearing opinions or maybe second opinions, third opinions, and you begin to just evaluate and think, hey, maybe that's a risk that I can perhaps bear with it. And yeah, I think that's the whole thing about vaccine. If it's, I mean, it is obviously health related, your body, your choice. But when it comes to this, hey, it's the government's choice.
Yeah, exactly. So that process, that decision making was taken away with mandate and things like that. So now we come into the American news cycle, and especially even Malaysian news cycle, the power of social media and search engine. Of course, now with AI, basically it's like the power of suggestion. You know, we talk about search engine. You type autofill, auto suggest. So a lot of people with basically, you know, maybe they are open, or you know, when I use the word open, I'm talking about they have really no idea what's happening, and maybe they are open to suggestion, and they will type, you know, Donald Trump, Joe Biden, whatever, and I can guarantee you now with all the social media, search engine, and you know, AI, that it is going to be 99% bad news about Trump. And even we demented Joe Biden there, they can't hide everything, because even the liberal progressive are getting sick of him. But of course, they will still prefer a demented man to be a president than Trump, because Trump will come and destroy them. So it's really, they kind of just suggest to you. So that's why I guess you already mentioned this, but maybe it's good to recap. You know, if you want to get out from these minds, this brain wash cycle, I think first thing is you don't want to get in a social media loop where suggestions are presented to you. You don't want to get into the loop where you are only reading news based on trending.
Yeah, or even just getting the sources from, you know, certain people are not expert in certain area, but they talk as though they know 100% about that area. And I mean, seriously, I mean, if you want to get truth, you go to journalists. I mean, you don't go to social media influencer, because that's not what they are trained to do. I mean, they are obviously there for marketing reasons. They are there to just get you to, I mean, for whatsoever reason. We're not judging their intention there, but it's just you get it from the right person. You get it from the journalists. I mean, you don't get it from any and everyone. It's just like, if let's say you want to watch sports news, you don't go to any, like, I mean, people are quite selective about sports commentator. you don't go to someone who don't know.
And they'll be like, oh, I know this person really hates Liverpool, you know. Then it's like
everything is bad.
Yeah, you know, you talk about social media, because my daughter is now 9, and she's into YouTube and things like that. So she really believes a lot of trash there. And every now and then we have to kind of talk to her and say, well, you can't believe everything. Then she's like, why can't? And it just shows that the mind is so impressionable. It is so easy. I mean, if you don't kind of take an active decision, then you're just going to follow the drift, and after a while you kind of get into that mind control. And it's the same with the news cycle, right? That if you don't explore, so the other thing, I think the second point we talk about, which is important, is you want to read different news. So I saw your example about Times of Israel and Al Jazeera was a good one, because those cannot be more polar opposite, right?
Yeah, and you really have to exercise a lot of discernment, because it's like, who's telling the truth here? I mean, obviously, one side is going to be more pro-Israel, the other side pro-Hamas, and you begin to like really just read. And I find it quite interesting, because I actually did a back search all the way up to 2005, especially with Al Jazeera, concerning the election of, I mean, Hamas being the government. And it was quite interesting, because I think prior to that, they were actually a bit anti-Hamas. And after that, the narrative started to change a little bit. I think they were still a bit more leaning towards Palestinian Authority, PA, rather than Hamas. But after that, you begin to see like a lot of this sort of news, and these are a bit more suppressed. I mean, you're gonna have to like do a lot of search, like deep dive, and really just go in one layer after another layer before you could even dig out this. I mean, you're talking about even a media outlet that seems to be very supportive of Hamas. It's not easy to find also. I mean, when it comes to all this like history.
Yep. And I think the other thing, of course, is I think one of the concern people have is while you all keep saying the mainstream media cannot be used and things like that. And yeah, you know, I mean, personally, I personally don't. I find it very hard to read mainstream media because once you know how they operate, it's a bit like in the old. Remember the like New Straits Times, the Star, Utusan, Berita Harian. We were talking about before 2018. Their governmental and political news are really just bullshit. It's like propaganda, you know. It's like the Star is like every day talk about how great MCA is. Now after 2018, they kind of change because they are forced to change. And so that's the thing. Now like, what would you say to people if you obviously know that this is more like my father-in-law always say the Star is like the branch of MCA, you know, and that's why a lot of people talk about like New York Times and CNBC. They are really like spokesperson or Democrat Party, right? So if you know, obviously, what would you say to people who are exploring? You know,
I mean, personally, I don't think there is any harm at all to keep reading.
So read and compare.
Yeah, read and compare. My approach would be read and compare, and you eliminate.
But at some point, you have to make a decision, right? So how do you make the decision?
Well, for me, I mean, after a while, knowing that most of the things are crap reporting, and you're there to.
So how do you determine crap reporting, like personally?
Well, so I mean, obviously, I think with Israel and Hamas case, I think you get to a point whereby you read everything is just so anti, as in like there's no room for any other sort of consideration at all. Because I remember I purposely dig in to just find in Al Jazeera what do they report about the hospital incident, and it was very, I would say, it's like neither here nor there sort of reporting. And when you begin to like see even there is like actual reporting of what happened.
So it lacks detail.
Yeah, very vague sort of description. I think. Okay. If I didn't remember wrongly, I remember it was quite vague in the sense.
So more like to stir the emotion rather than like this happened. You know, there's evidence.
Yeah, because you want to go back to the source. I mean, if there is any photos at all, if there is any thing at all that was really, really being presented and how true it is. So eventually I just felt like that there's really no point. I mean, initially it was interesting to just read, but up to a point you just felt like you only have like, if let's say you're going to just commit like 15 minutes a day to read about this portion, you're not going to waste your time to keep on reading anymore. I think at one point, the way I work is I work by elimination. If it doesn't make the list, time. Yeah, it doesn't worth. I mean, it's not worth of my effort and time. I will just I mean, occasionally I might just still just read a little bit, but that won't be like my main focus. So I mean, personally, I guess that goes back to how you are making your decision.
Yep.
I mean, if you work by elimination, then you're going to have to find ways how you filter. There must be a standard that you apply.
So that's your personal processing more in terms of elimination. And I think that's a good approach because if you work that way, I think that would be helpful. Just compare. And the other thing I think for me, especially talking about the Western establishment reporting, will be if they kept using an unnamed source. Then you know it's a telltale sign that they don't have something, or if they report something without video or without verbatim transcript. So I remember in Malaysia it is always it's very common. You know, we're talking about Najib second term, and he was under siege because Pakatan Rakyat and then Harapan were really on the rise at that time. And he couldn't deal with it. You know, they have the whole media propaganda department. You know those. I think even Pemandu, all those were brought in to boost. You know, I think at one time he even hired Ling Kok Wing, right, the media specialist, to help him. All these things came out, and I remember it is very, very common for Barisan Nasional politicians. They will say something, and then later on they say, "Oh, I didn't say that." They will challenge the reporter. You prove it. And I remember one case in Sarawak. I can't remember the exact politician. Someone challenged. I think Malaysia Kini was doing a reporting, and then Malaysia Kini upload the audio. Now of course, I think they were talking like some sort of Malay native. I think it was in Cebu, I think, if I'm not mistaken. So doing state election, that kind of. So people kind of fully embrace the lingam process, right? Sounds like me, looks like me, but it's not me. Just basically, and that's why I kind of, we just kind of sidetrack a little bit. The SOTS incident, right? Now, did you read that? One Muslim convert in Sabah was sentenced to jail, under the Multimedia Act, which is crazy, and then somebody also here, right? He kind of posted something in social media, and then he was confronted with some silat master and things like that. So I just kind of brought me to the lingam thing. If someone accused you of that, I think the best defense is, well, it's not me. Looks like me, it's not me. Sounds like me, it's not me. You want to prove it, you go and prove it. You go and ask Facebook for IP and things like that. If I use a VPN, no way you can know. It's like, unfortunately, I think people have, it's like you have the mob rule rising, you have the cancel culture rising.
Yeah, this just reminds me of one of the most interesting documentary that I've really, really seen was the Amber Heard versus Johnny Depp.
Yeah.
That cannot be more mind-blowing. Seriously, I thought it was so well done in the sense that you begin to really just read, because early on, a lot of people are very, very supportive of Amber Heard.
Yeah, because of Me Too and things like that.
Exactly, and she presented herself as the front of Me Too, only to see that, hey, actually she was the one abusing the other party and actually defame another person, which I felt like there's justice that is being served. But it's so interesting to really just follow through that whole thing, and you begin to see, hey, actually media can really be manipulated by people in power. And the amount of support that was being given by the people, which was not really publicly shown in media. Let's say you're just really reading like Malaysian news to just follow that. You won't know that, hey, actually a lot of people are very, very supportive of Johnny Depp, and they don't think that he is someone who does not have integrity at all.
Yeah, and this thing, go back to the boycott with certain outlets, the SOTS issue, and you can just see that the media now. Of course, I'm not saying in Malaysia it's fanned by the media, maybe not quite, but it's really fanned by politicians or religious people. And why people can get into that kind of now, of course, sometimes with social media and things like that, and then you have authority come out and say it need to be investigated. Then you have look at the SOC incident in Johor. I think one of the business license was revoked. And now, of course, all these are the feeling in media. Are people really behind this or not? But I think it goes back to what we are discussing today, that when people are not exercising their brain to determine whether the reporting is fair or not, fair-minded people will be like, because of the fear and oppression, people don't really dare to say anything. But the reality is, I think I saw some commentator and Muslim commentator and say, look, you talk about you talk about insults or to the faith and religion. Yes, but you have to look at whether whether it's deliberate or intentional, because some mistakes are mistakes. And you look at the whole chain of events, few thousand sorts, there's 5 or 10 manufacturer outside and things like that. Everyone apologized already. We tried. It's almost like you have people who want to take advantage of the scenario to kind of, you look at certain politician, right?
Knowing that KK Mark is also wanting to go for IPO listing as well.
Yep.
You can't help but think, hey, where's the line? Exactly. If you keep on moving the line of tolerance, because I think that there's no such thing as being, Malaysians are very, very tolerant, I think, generally speaking. But if you keep pushing the line of like, hey, you need to be even more tolerant to what end?
This tolerant, very interesting. You use the word tolerant because it's like one-sided tolerant, right? You demand one side to, and that's why I really like what Zai Ibrahim is saying about all these things. He is like, is our faith so weak? And that is the heart of the issue, right? That it's not about faith. It's not about strong or weak. It's really people taking advantage. And politicians, I mean, they would say that, look, every good thing, every crisis, we're able to leverage. That's why COVID, you can see there's a very natural and kind of beneficial response, but no, they have to go the extreme because they must leverage and take full advantage of that. And I think politicians will be the first to admit that. So the only thing is, how do we stop this kind of behavior is when people are able to determine and make a good analysis of the news and begin to say, look, I'm not going to believe in that. And I think coming back again to the American election cycle, because that's what we kind of want to cover for a while. I mean, of course, if there's important Malaysian update, we want to talk about that. And you start to see what's the word? You start to see like people are not so influenced. I mean, now of course, election cycle in America, before you have the big one, you have all the primary to choose a candidate. But you can see that a lot of the mainstream media candidates are losing very, very badly. I mean, when you consider what's happening in Argentina, Javier Milei, who promised pain, he promised pain to Argentina and he got elected. El Salvador president won by a landslide, by going hard on crime. So would you say there is maybe a bit of the unveiling of the veil now?
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, I was just reading about this reporting, the polling from the National Pulse, which is also another great source.
Yep.
So it says here, data, 60% say media is the enemy of people. 40% believe bloodbath is a hoax. So it's quite interesting because the polling here asks, former President Donald Trump recently said that it would be a bloodbath if he didn't win in November, which is more likely. So people were asked to choose between 3 different options. 1, he was talking about auto workers losing their job. 2, he was talking about widespread political violence by his supporters. Then 3, not sure. So there's 11% obviously that say not sure.
Okay.
There is a whooping 40% that say they believe it's a hoax about political violence. But it's very encouraging to see that there's actually 49% that saw through the lie. So I think people are really beginning to, when there is no suppression of media, I think that's where the test lies, whether or not people are continue to believe certain narrative or not. So if you see that there is actually a shift in terms of how they are perceiving it, and it's really just go back to the 2020 election, whereby if people knew about Hunter Biden, I don't think they will win. I mean, Democrats won't really win the election at all.
Yep.
So you won't even have President Joe Biden. But I think it's interesting because although there is this sort of things that are happening, I mean, Malaysia, we cannot be any more. We know about election corruption that is happening. I mean, and we can really just begin to see how they overcome this, and maybe there is a lesson that we can actually apply in Malaysian context.
Yep, I think so. And I mean, we do have a lot of experience, but of course, after 2020, I start to realize that the election cheating is actually quite a tradition in America. And I know a lot of people will find it very shocking, but because they are so decentralized, their election apparatus is based on state arrangement. So they are truly decentralized. And I think one of the things, now we're kind of moving to another area, is when you have decentralization, which is, I think Madani government is kind of decentralized. Compared to the old government of old. You're going to have some inefficiency, you're going to have some challenges, but in the long run, I think even empowering Sarawak. In fact, I was just talking to a lot, like my office people the other day. I mean, all the high level people, and they just suddenly say, "Well, when are you all going to have independence?" And in fact, one of the guy is a tax guy, and he's like, "Well, without Sarawak, the West Malaysia economy is doomed." So the people who knows the numbers knows the game, but even then, I don't sense any alarm in the. It's like if I'm a West Malaysian, I would be super alarmed that Sarawak is thinking to leave. But you can see that people are kind of accepting this decentralization, and so I think it's a good thing when you kind of remove strongman, and so we hope to see more liberalization of media, I guess, and that's one of the purpose we do this show, right? And just a very, very small part, but we just want to present a different kind of perspective, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, just like what we say, every single vote counts. The same thing goes to every single step counts. I think small, little baby steps will actually eventually will reach to the destination that we want.
Yeah. So Lara, I think our time is kind of up, and I know we kind of like last episode kind of go over the place, but it's really I guess we are trying to develop a process, and I think along the way we are also learning, we are also maturing, and we hope our viewers and listeners will you will do something. I know in the past we always say, look, we're not going to tell you what to read and things like that, but we kind of drop some names and things like that more for your consideration, not to say you need to do it. But some media works for you, some doesn't work for you. I mean, you have things you like which I may not like, right? I mean, which is totally fine, right? So yeah, so that's what we hope to do. So I guess until next time.
Yes.
All right. Bye bye for now.
Bye bye.